Browns, Panthers in Carolina today. We are one day closer to the start. Heard around the world Friday. Shedeur Sanders starting for the Cleveland Browns in preseason game number 1. A game you're going to hear right here on 92.3 The Fan. And to talk about Shedeur, the situation he's being put in, and more, we head out to the fan hotline and welcome in Ashley Bastock of Cleveland.com, who joins us every single Wednesday. Ashley, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. My hamstrings are fine. I heard that was a discussion after last week when I was on, but don't worry. I'm at 100% and my hamstrings feel great. So you all didn't jinx me.
That's exactly what Dylan Gabriel said before he got hurt. So I'm just going to say, like, you get too cocky and the hamstring gods will come down on you.
We'll see. I don't know. I'm feeling okay right now. We're through that dog days of training camp portion where it's 4 or 3 practices every single 5 days in a row. So I'm feeling like we avoided the jinx, quite honestly.
That's exactly what you say right before the gods get you there.
Ashley,
We're so pro Ashley here that now we're worried for you. With no first team reps, limited first team reps, not a lot of action with the first team today, and no Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman. What should the expectations be for Shedeur getting the start on Friday?
Well, I don't know. It's tough when you don't have, I think, Jeudy, especially, right? Because, that's not really your first team pass catching core. And said too, I mean, obviously that's another really big target. So I am kind of fascinated. The first preseason game, typically under Kevin Stefanski, it's been like some starters get some reps and it's not very many. And then the third preseason game usually winds up being that quote unquote duress rehearsal where they play a little bit more. But, a lot of times your extremely veteran guys, they end up sitting them anyway or barely playing them, like your Myles Garrett's or even Denzel Ward, Joel Bitonio. Like, you don't want to risk injury. So I'm fascinated by this, mainly because we really haven't seen him get many of those reps with that first team offense. And really, like, we're still not quite going to be seeing that when he gets to start. And I think, like, it's tough for him because I think when you look at everything the Browns have wanted Shedeur to work on and kind of looking at this as a development project for both of these guys, both of these rookie QBs in some respects, but with Shedeur and the pre-snap stuff and doing all of that, I think it's always going to help when you have a Pro Bowl caliber receiver like Jerry Jeudy. I said it last week, like when you watch him, when you watch Deontay Johnson in this training camp, those guys just look different. And I think for anyone who's expecting like Shedeur to be overwhelmed or anything like that, having really good pass catchers can really help a rookie quarterback. So I'm kind of fascinated by this. I mean, I guess we'll see how they handle the tight ends and David Njoku and Harold Fannin. I assume Harold Fannin is going to get a good amount of reps there just to get him going as a rookie. But not having Jerry Jeudy, I think that's the number one thing I've been most curious to see is Shedeur throwing to him. So going to have to wait a little bit longer to see that, I guess.
What does it mean to you that obviously Stefanski cares about these joint practices, but then in these joint practices, Flacco got what was probably the most reps that we've seen him have in a while.
Yeah, like the joint practices for them, I think in so many ways wind up being more important than the games themselves. And you hear people talk about that around the league. And we've heard guys say this over the last 3 or 4 years under Stefanski, but it's this idea of you're still competing, you're going against, another front, and it's in a more controlled environment. Like, I think they just feel more in control of the work being done in those settings. I think, this was an important first step in terms of those joint practices. But next week in Philly, when you have the 2 back-to-back, I think that's really going to paint a better picture for everything. And like the Flacco thing is interesting in terms of like the number of reps he's getting, just because he's obviously the oldest quarterback in the room. And you don't want him to get banged up because he's really the only guy that hasn't banged up to this point in time. And obviously those other injuries played the role in them going out and signing Snoop Huntley off of the couch, basically. And he's familiar with Kevin Stefanski and the Browns, who's obviously here throughout training camp and the preseason last year, but it's a different offense. And, I think that's why you go out and get that guy. So you want him to have reps because you're going to need him to play on Friday. So comes at the expense of Joe, but also maybe saves Joe from getting beat up. It was raining down there in Carolina today. So who knows in terms of that way, what their thinking was in terms of risks versus reward. But I always think with Flacco, it's like he just doesn't need as many reps in training camp as the other guys. Like, he's a vet, Super Bowl MVP. Like, he'll take the reps they give him, but I don't quite think it's a necessity in the same way it is for a rookie, or in the case of Tyler Huntley, a guy you're bringing in off of the couch to come in and play some snaps for you in a game 2 days from now.
Ashley Bastock on the fan hotline with Nick Wilson, Jonathan Peterlin. Specific to how the Browns are handling the quarterback kerfuffle here, we kind of said earlier, like a mark of a good competition, four-way battle for quarterback, is that nobody's happy. Joe Flacco has said he'd like more reps, please. Is there one of the four quarterbacks, though, that you think might have the biggest gripe about the opportunities or lack thereof that they're getting?
That's an interesting question. Like, my gut tells me if I had to pick someone who should have a gripe, like, it should be Shedeur, because of like what I said about Joe Flacco, right? Like, he doesn't need the same kind of reps. Shedeur, I think, has had a great attitude throughout this process, right? We've seen him handle all of this extremely well, and talking about living in the moment and making the most of the opportunities he's given. But the reality is, before they went down to Carolina for this one joint practice, we still haven't seen him, as we said at the top of this segment, with the first team offense. And of the team reps, not including 7-on-7s, he was the one who was getting the fewest of those, the fewest opportunities. He was always with the 2s or the 3s. And he's performed very well when given those opportunities. But, I've said it on our podcast as well. He's done enough to make me want to see more. And now he's getting that opportunity. So this is the next step. Now he's going to have to perform on Friday when the bright lights are on. And I'm curious, when he goes out there, is he going to look further along than maybe even the Browns anticipated? Like, I certainly think that's a possibility. But we'll have to wait and see. The old adage of this is why they play the games. But in terms of practice reps, I would say Shedeur would have the most to complain about, and I'm really impressed that we haven't heard a peep out of him complaining in that regard. I think that's the best attitude a rookie can have.
What type of offense are you expecting on Friday night? Are you expecting them to just kind of let Shedeur just rip it out there, or are you expecting him to kind of turn around and do a lot of handoffs?
I think I would expect more handoffs and quick yardage type stuff. Now, I'm actually curious how many chances like that they are going to let him take, because when we have seen him in those practice sessions, the accuracy is the number one thing that jumps off the page, right? But I think when it's a rookie, you want him to get comfortable. You want him to gain his footing, get some confidence early. So I think, some slants, some quick yardage stuff, some handoffs. We see them do a lot of that in practice as well. They have whole periods where they're working on outside quick yardage stuff. They have whole periods where they're working on inside zone stuff. So that's kind of what I'm anticipating. Like, this isn't the spread offense of last year where we're going to see them go 3 or 4 wide a lot. I think we're going to be back to the multiple tight ends. I think they want their running backs involved in the pass game. These are all things we've seen. So my expectation would be a lot of short yardage, a lot of handoff stuff early, and then we'll see how it goes and see how many chances they're going to be willing to let him take.
Ashley, before we let you go, when do you think the Browns need to name an official starting quarterback by?
Well, as a reporter, I would love for them to do it like yesterday, right? I would love to get as much information as possible. Look, I don't know that they need to. It wouldn't surprise me if they don't, just knowing the way them and Kevin Stefanski sort of operate. Like, I don't know that they're going to publicly announce it. I've been saying, though, since training camp began, I think next week in Philly is a really huge deal, because you want your starter to get those prime reps in those 2 practices against that Eagles defense. Like, that is ideal. And I think, look, we've seen them leave it open basically for what has played out over the last week, right? These injuries and this room getting dinged up was fairly unexpected. So I understand why they don't want to just come out and say, okay, like Joe Flacco's our starter or Kenny Pickett's our starter, even though I think that's what most people have been inferring, that it's going to be one of the vets. But I think they wanted to kind of wait and see how everything played out. And, I think what if Shedeur goes out and plays so amazing on Friday and really elevates himself in this competition? That all being said, I think those joint practices in Philly remain so important because of the value of those first team reps. And then you have to know who you want to actually play in the game, because that's typically reserved for not the starters when you have multiple joint practices like that. So short answer, I don't know that we're going to see them publicly name a starter. I don't know that they have to do that, even if they figure it out internally. But I continue to just kind of go by. I think the reps are going to tell the story of where this competition stands. And by the time we leave Philly, I think we will have a fairly good idea.
Follow her on social media at Ashley Bastock 42. Check out her work on cleveland.com. Ashley, great stuff. We definitely appreciate it today. And I'm sure it's going to be a whirlwind 5 days with whatever happens on Friday.
It always is. I'll talk to you guys from Philly next week, though.
Thank you so much. Ashley Bastock there on the Fan Hotline.